Hello, LA Daiku. It is December. The holidays are upon us. The shortest day of the year is right around the corner. It's my favorite time of year, partially because every December we celebrate the birth of someone who came into this world a long time ago and has changed the lives of billions of people because of his commitment to the idea that people should be good to one another. Of course, I'm speaking of Beethoven. It is Beethoven's birthday today. He was born 250 years ago. And I'm struck in this time during the pandemic when we can't celebrate his birthday with all the music making we'd like to. I'm struck by the fact that the composer, who didn't have a sense of hearing, is celebrated after a quarter millennium by a bunch of musicians who have to be silent. The Ninth Symphony is such a transformational work. I believe it was for Beethoven, and it certainly is for the people who've encountered it since him. So I want to take a moment tonight to think about Beethoven, to think about what I call the spirit of the Ninth Symphony, and then to share with you our recording of the Ninth Symphony, of the fourth movement from nearly 5 years ago in the Aratani Theater. Beethoven has a kind of reputation, almost a mythic idea of him persists, that he was gruff or ill-tempered or short-tempered or grumpy, misanthropic. But in fact, that was not his nature. I want to read to you a letter that he wrote. So these are his words. He wrote this letter in 1802, so he was 31 years old, already with a lot of success as a composer, student of Haydn, a couple symphonies, and a lot of piano music under his belt. But he was losing his sense of hearing. And after going to a number of doctors for help with that, in 1802, got the awful news that that probably was not going to be cured. He was living in the countryside where it was thought the lack of noise would spare his hearing. He was living in a little city called Heiligenstadt, which means holy city. And he wrote this letter to his brothers. For my brothers Karl and Johann, O you who think or say that I am malevolent, stubborn, or misanthropic, how greatly do you wrong me, for you do not know the secret cause. From childhood, my heart and mind were disposed to the gentle feelings of goodwill. But for 6 years now, I have been a hopeless case, aggravated by senseless physicians, cheated year after year in the hope of improvement, finally compelled to face the prospect of a lasting malady whose cure will take years or perhaps be impossible. Born with an ardent and lively temperament, even susceptible to the diversions of society, I have been compelled to isolate myself, to live in loneliness. For it is impossible for me to say to men, speak louder, shout, for I am deaf. How could I possibly admit such an infirmity in the one sense which should be more perfect in me than in others, a sense which I once possessed in highest perfection? I cannot do it. Therefore, forgive me when you see me draw back when I would gladly mingle with you. For me, there can be no recreations in society of my fellows, refined conversation, mutual exchange of thought. Only just as little as the greatest needs command may I mix with society. I must live like an exile. If I approach near to people, a hot terror seizes upon me, a fear that I may be subjected to the danger of letting my condition be observed. Thus it has been during the past year which I spent in the country, to spare my hearing as much as possible. Only occasionally have I yielded to my inclination for society, but what a humiliation when one stood beside me and heard a flute in the distance and I heard nothing, or someone heard a shepherd singing and again I heard nothing. Such incidents brought me to the verge of despair. But a little more, and I would have put an end to my life. Only art it was that withheld me. It seemed impossible to leave the world until I had produced all that I felt called upon to produce. Perhaps I shall get better, perhaps not. I am prepared. O Divine One, Thou lookest into my inmost soul, and Thou knowest that love of man and desire to do good live therein. O men, when someday you read these words, reflect that you did me wrong. Farewell, and love each other, and do not wholly forget me when I am dead. Heiligenstadt, October 6th, 1802. Well, I'm very pleased to observe that we are in no danger of forgetting Beethoven. And the depth of great work he produced is enormous, so it's not just because of the Ninth Symphony, but the Ninth Symphony casts the longest shadow, has spread itself out in the world wider than any other music of his. And I think there are qualities about the piece that I like to call the spirit of the ninth that have made its reach so enormous and its impact so felt by so many people. When we talk about classical music in Europe, people like to talk about firsts. And there are a lot of firsts in the Ninth Symphony. It was a huge orchestra for its time. The first symphony to use trombones and a contrabassoon and percussion like that, cymbals. Um, it's it's a very long piece for its time, maybe the longest symphony that had been written by then. And of course, it has a choir in it, which is the first symphony to have a choir in it. And the choir, this is a great big piece for choir, and it's not a religious piece. It's not on a religious subject, and that was a first for choral music. It is certainly a spiritual piece, and it deals with a spiritual subject, but it's not religious. It's not within any one religion. Beethoven, we find out from his letter, wanted nothing more in his heart than to feel connected with fellow human beings. And he found it impossible to do because of his hearing. But I think that time that he spent, the 22 years after realizing his deafness was incurable until he wrote the Ninth Symphony, was a lot of time for him to contemplate what it would mean to be in a world with fellow human beings. And in Schiller's words, in the Ode to Joy, he found something that really spoke to that desire. Schiller says that the experience of joy is a divine spark given to us by the gods, kind of to remind us of our purpose here, which is to be good to one another. Those are my words, not his. The time right before the creation of the Ninth Symphony, the late 18th century, was, of course, the period of the Enlightenment. It was a time of looking at human beings and their potential. And one of the things that philosophers and poets got interested in at that time was the question of what's good and what's right. And why do people do good things? And there's kind of two reasons that people do good things. Um, Either they do it for an internal reason, it is what they believe is the right and good thing to do, and they do it, or they do it for an external reason. They want something from someone, or they want to impress someone, or they want to be remembered, or they want to avoid being punished, or they were told to do it and they're afraid of whoever it is that told them that. Um, those ideas all uh, were being washed away at the time of the Enlightenment. And the idea of doing the right thing because you don't want to be punished was kind of what Christianity was all about for a long time. And Enlightenment, humanist thinking, started to take up the idea that maybe people didn't do the right thing to avoid going to hell. Maybe they did the right thing because there was something inside of them that inspired them to do the right thing. And that's what Schiller is saying. We have an experience of joy. It's like a little bell that rings and reminds us of what's right and good in the world, which is being connected with other people. So that idea certainly got refined in Beethoven. Now, we've been 9 months without singing together, which seems like an eternity. And so we've had a little taste of Beethoven's experience of being cut out from society. Our singing together is part of our society. It's part of our connection with one another, and we haven't been able to have it. And so in this time, we've had to rely on what we have inside. I've asked you to keep the flame burning inside. The memory of what it is to sing together, the wish to do it again. Beethoven undoubtedly had a lot of flame carrying inside because he wasn't able to live in society as he wished to. And when that longing in him met Schiller's words, something extraordinary happened in the creation of the Ninth Symphony. And I think the reach of the piece has a lot to do with the universality of that message. The words are alle Menschen werden Brüder. Now, Menschen means men. It also means people, but Brüder unambiguously means brothers. And when I talk about the piece these days, I try to find some other way of saying it that doesn't exclude the more than half the people in the world who aren't male and therefore aren't anyone's brother. But that's what it means, and that meant something to Beethoven because he had two brothers and not an easy relationship with them. So what lives in the work, in the spirit of the Ninth Symphony, is Beethoven's longing, Schiller's hope, and the fusion of the two knit together by absolutely glorious music. Too many moments in the piece to count that are filled with wonder and surprise and thrill. Beethoven was not an instant genius composer. Mozart was. Mozart often said that he had the whole thing in his head and writing music was something that took place almost instantly here, and then all he had to do was write it down. Beethoven wasn't that way. Beethoven worked and worked and worked and worked and made sketch after sketch and draft after draft. And of course, the choral fantasy from 14, 16 years earlier is in a way a draft of the melody of the Ninth Symphony. But all of that craft that he put into it yielded something completely new and filled with ideas that I think are going to be relevant for human beings for a long, long time. We're looking back a quarter of a millennium at this music, and it's really still expanding in the world and growing in reach and importance. And I can imagine it doing that for millennia to come. I'm struck often by the coincidence of the fact that Mount Everest is the highest point on the earth and is just barely within the reach of human beings. If it were any higher, no one would climb it. They couldn't do it. The people who climb it barely make it. The Ninth Symphony is like that for singers. You don't have to be a trained singer to sing the Ninth Symphony, as you know. You don't have to be auditioned. You have to want it and you have to work at it, but you don't have to have anything more than that. And I believe the Ninth Symphony is the very hardest piece of music in that category. If it were any harder, a lot of people who want to sing it couldn't do it. And so singing it is itself a challenging and almost heroic act. It's hard music, and singing it well requires a lot. And when we do it, we're proud of having done it, and we feel we've done something. The other thing, of course, that we do when we sing the Ninth Symphony is we embody Schiller's idea that we should be like brothers and sisters, that we should work together to experience and cultivate those moments of joy, those divine gifts from the God. It's amazing that performing the piece is not just expressing the notes and rhythms, but expressing what the words of the piece are talking about. Creating the kind of world Schiller could only imagine in his poem, and frankly, that Beethoven mostly could only imagine. Those are the things that are part of the spirit of the Ninth Symphony. And when we get to know about them, it makes the piece irresistible and powerful. It's changed lives all around the world many, many times over. And it's not quite 200 years old. And Beethoven, I'm sure, would have been thrilled at how many of us carry such love for the notes that he worked and struggled so hard to create. So it's his 250th birthday, and we are not going to sing happy birthday because we can't sing right now because we'll get everybody sick. But I want to take a moment and think about the spirit of the Ninth, the spirit of Beethoven, and what a tremendous gift those have been to the world. And I want to take a moment and think about the gift of LA Daiku, the actual gifts we've already enjoyed, how many times we have been able to sing together and travel together and share music together, but also the gift ongoing, that we keep our love for this music and each other alive in our hearts until we can sing together again. So think about that for a moment while I go and find our performance of the finale of the Daiku. And happy birthday, Beethoven. Kampai.